In 1971, when Amtrak was formed, the transition to one entity for most intercity passenger services was far from seamless. Amtrak would mix equipment from the railroads it took over services from, resulting in mixed paint schemes and a lack of a national identity for the railroad. There would be problems far greater than this, which still exist today. Chicago, Illinois, like many large cities across the United States, was served by many different railroads, and thus had many different railroad stations. In Chicago, the problem was exacerbated by the fact that the city was where railroads in the east and west would meet and exchange goods and passengers traveling across the country. The problem was spotted in the early 20th century, with Chicago Union Station being constructed and becoming a place for all railroads, regardless of competition with another, to run their passenger services. The amount of railway stations in the city was really beginning to become a problem, as at one point about 100 railroads operated in and out of Chicago, and while many merged with each other in the coming decades, the number was still about 30 railroads in the 1920s. Most railroads decided to join Joint Union Station and closed down their own stations and built a track connection to the line serving the station, while others didn't. This left 8 stations in operation from the 1940s up until Amtrak took over passenger services, and this overall lack of unification began to cause problems for the new railroad. Amtrak's goal of becoming a national system was hampered in the early days by the fact that some connections were almost impossible in Chicago, due to the sheer number of locations of all the stations the railroad was operating out of. The cost of now owning 8 railroad stations were also starting to mount for the railroad, and it was quickly realized that something needed to be done. Amtrak decided to make its hub in Chicago Union Station, as it was the most convenient station to route all trains to, and the trains that could easily be moved were moved when service started in May of 1971, but for some routes, this would still prove to be a challenge. The Illinois Central Railroad did not join Union Station, and it did not have a convenient track connection to any other railroad that used Union Station, but it would be precarious to use for the large number of trains that used Central Station, so Amtrak was forced to continue using the station. But in March of 1972, Amtrak realized that cumbersome routing would be a price it would be willing to pay. Trains would have to back out of Union Station for almost 2 miles, where they could arrive at the only connection between railroads. They would then switch directions and continue on their journey. This process could add an additional 10 to 20 minutes onto each trip. The switch to this routing happened nearly 50 years ago, and today trains still have to do this same maneuver to access Union Station. You would think that in the past 50 years, a Y or a track connection somewhere else would have been built, and while there have been countless proposals to do so, none have ever been implemented. Considering that 3 daily round trips have to complete this cumbersome maneuver on some short distance corridor trains, it's hard to believe that changing this routing wasn't a priority in the past 50 years. When Amtrak started operation, the process of consolidating all of its trains into one station in Chicago was easy for some routes and harder for others, but 50 years later, it seems that this process is still going on. Be sure to subscribe for more.